New Pope, who dis?
Welcome to the officially unofficial podcast for HBO's The Young, New, and Old Popes. I'm assuming that's what comes next, right?
The church doesn't have time to worry about the old pope.
No?
It only concerns itself the new and the young.
The public seems to be very concerned about the old pope, who is actually the young pope. We're here to talk about season 1 of the new pope, episode 2. The second episode is what it's called or something. Mm-hmm. I don't know. The naming conventions on this confuse me still. It's week 2. What'd you guys think of... Should I introduce myself? I'm Jim.
I'm A.Ron.
I'm Cecily.
This intro. I'm the father.
I'm the son.
And I'm the holy A.Ron.
There we go. What'd you think of this episode?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. This show is... I feel like it's got so much symbolism. Every single scene and shot and word spoken has so much symbolism in it. And I felt like I had a decent handle on the first episode, but this one, not so much. There's a few things that escaped me.
I'm sorry.
I was going to ask which scenes, but maybe we should just do general thoughts and then get into that.
Yeah.
I continue to really like it. I have it's interesting because I was getting on the new Pope subreddit. This is, I think, called the Young Pope, and it seems like there's a lot of people that are unhappy with this season. I was also surprised to see that, like, I guess in Europe they've got access to episode 3 and 4 already. I thought that they were
really?
Yeah, I thought they were this season they were going to get it like a couple days early, but not. Yeah. But yeah, they're on episode 3 or 4, so I guess I'm going to have to like excommunicate myself from the online discussion because I don't want to be spoiled. I continue to really like it, and I think that there is a lot of differences in this season from last season, but of course there would be. Like, it's 4 years of history have elapsed, and the world's in a different place, and this guy's got different things he wants to say. But I continue to think it's great. Like, I think that they're doing a lot of stuff, of really interesting things around sexuality and like grief and depression and fear of the other, honestly, that feels very... Sometimes I get scared watching this show, like, oh God, what is this guy doing? What are people's reactions going to be at? What are people going to think about it? But that's art, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it sometimes feels scary and dangerous. But I continue to think it's just, I laugh out loud every single, like, I don't know if it's appropriate to, but some of the stuff that Sir John gets up to, just the extremes of the grief that his family are displaying is just as shocking and odd as like the extremes of wealth that are on display, and the sexuality, and that's all got to mean something. But that's what I'm always like, what does it mean that he's showing these guys at this chicken, these very obviously ethnic guys at this chicken joint with their arms crossed and frowny faces watching this young girl dance for this old, political papal operative? Like, what does it fucking mean?
Yeah,
especially
that's one of the scenes.
Especially off the scene where you've got this rollaway cart TV showing this Muslim extremist terror rant to an empty room that gets shut off, backdropped against Europe's quote unquote immigration crisis. Like, what does it all mean? What does it all mean? I don't know. I'm scared to find out.
I mean, they're obviously building, a lot of the pressures on the church, right, in modern days. But yeah, I find myself also questioning what the hell does that mean, especially that scene. That was maybe the most confusing scene in this entire episode. And it's the one that runs over the end credits.
Well, it also reminds me of last season's into episode 4, which I went back and watched, where they had the prime minister, I think, of Greenland come in, and, her and Lenny have a little sparring about who was the first in Greenland and who is the natives and who are the colonizers. And that episode ends with this lady dancing to this, I think, Greenland pop song with this text that explains that Greenlanders are irrepressible dancers. What did that, as far as I know, that didn't mean anything. So
yeah, normally when you see something like this in this show, I think they're playing with just, power dynamics in religion and sexual relationships, and like how those things all intermingle in a very visual way. And that's really cool, but like the Greenland thing is very confusing.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what are they trying to say about the Greenlanders?
It's anyone. Sometimes, like I said, and the thing about like the kangaroo,
Or like the nuns dancing in the opening credits. Like
Yeah.
women dancing means something that's not quite clear, and it's not quite sexuality.
And there's this very like modern cross, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's a cross, but it's flashing with this modern light and very just visually arresting imagery. It's like, what are they getting at? And they're showing it from different angles. We question whether it would be the same intro every time. It sort of is, but they're showing everything from different angles every time, at least so far. I don't know what it means.
I was thinking when I was watching like the heaving mass of nunnery and some of the other overtly sexual things that were talked about, both good and bad, in this episode. I was thinking about the Fred Rogers pseudo biopic we saw, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and Mr. Rogers' assertion that if it's human, it's mentionable. And if it's mentionable, it's manageable.
Yeah.
And how at odds that is. Like, you know, obviously Mr. Rogers is a man of faith, but how at odds that is with a lot of versions of Christianity, especially the Catholic Church is depicted on this show, that like these things, these human impulses can't even be mentioned. They must be denied. Church, popes or priests are not allowed to marry, let alone be married to a gay man.
Or to that point, like Adam, the dead brother of John, he's mentioned every single day for 40 years, yet that grief is unmanageable.
Yeah. Because it is there's something short circuited in that, and like, you know, what Mr. Rogers was talking about, in a healthy way to resolve conflicts and stuff. There's something sick or unhinged or unbalanced in that approach. And I kept on thinking about that in like that is like you know, the Bible talks about a house divided against itself can't standing. How can you presume to rule over humanity if you deny basic tenets of humanity?
Yeah.
Like, how can you ever hope to have that as a stable source of power?
I don't know. I mean, it's clearly they're painting a picture of the Catholic Church that is crumbling. Like, that's what the show is doing.
Yeah.
And whether or not it'll reach a resolution where they figured out some equilibrium, or whether they're going to go off the deep end in either direction, whether you go the direction of Francis II or Pius XIII, or whatever way they're going to take it, will that destroy it? Like, what's the end game for the show? I have no idea. Are they going to take it to that conclusion, or are they just going to sort of leave it with questions? Big question marks. Are they going to say something about the way the Catholic Church should go, or potentially will go, or are they just going to kind of throw it all out there and let you decide for yourself?
Is it Paulo Sorrentino or Sorrento?
Sorrentino.
I think the safe thing would be to have the season end in a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know how safe he particularly feels. He might actually
Not
have
at all,
some things
to
to
me.
say. Because honestly, just some of these things, like showing a pope that does divest a church of its wealth and wants to use its vast property holdings to house people who are in need, like, that's already super fucking dangerous.
That's a Molotov to St. Peter's Basilica.
And
That's
and it's not just a Catholic church. This is like the Joel Osteens who closed his church to hurricane victims when his community was struck. Like, that's not Christ-like, man. I read the Bible a lot back in my youth, and I know what the man taught, and it was not that. It was not slamming the door shut in the poor and the hungry and the needy, the people that need food and clothing and shelter. Like, just saying that, and the fact that, you know, the Cardinals all had him assassinating. There's the scene of, like, you know, all these like kind of like pigs at the trough, like getting all their gold and their crosses and things back and putting the rings on their fingers. Like, that's dangerous. That's a very dangerous thing to throw around, because it's holding the church account for its actions and its lack of action.
Yeah, especially as an Italian, where the country is predominantly Catholic.
Can I ask you? So this seems like it's something to talk about. They ask Brannox what he thinks love is, and he tells this parable, which is very Christ-like, about, you know, the politician says, "Let me help you." The doctor says to this indigent man dying on the street. The doctor says, "Let me cure you." His daughter says, "Let me give you money to get you indoors." And his friend says, "Let me share this bottle of wine with you." And the church says, "I'm thinking about you." I was talking about this with Cecily, and she said that she interpreted that as the church is the one showing love because everyone else is trying to help, but the church is like, actually keeping a person in their thoughts. I mean,
Right, yeah. I mean, it seems like, a friend could share their wine and provide some temporary relief. All these people are offering solutions, but the church is the one that keeps them in their thoughts. And that's his interpretation of love, maybe?
That's how I read it, too.
The
See,
same way
I
he
do
loves the
different.
church, and he's going to keep the church in his thoughts, and that's how he's going to come to the correct answers, because he loves it.
I'll admit to not totally understanding what he was getting at, but that's how I read it as well.
Well, I'm
Right.
not going
Do
to...
you have a different interpretation?
Yeah, I'm not going to venture that I know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the show is pretty opaque. But
Yeah,
you know,
all of
there's
these things have a flag of, like, this is my interpretation
Right.
and my thoughts.
There's a passage I think in James about the faith without works is dead because there's no you can say everyone can say they have faith, but unless that faith has an impact in your life,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. But if I take that into that, you have people like a doctor offering to cure someone is a manifestation of love, because if you didn't care, then you'd be like, well, fucking die in the streets. A politician saying, let me try to help you, is a manifestation of love. A friend just commiserating with you and sharing the good things he has in his life, where the church says, well, I'll just keep you in your thoughts. Like, that's the very close to the thoughts and prayers that is thrown around too often. And it also bookended with him saying, I'm going to, and this is so why I think Sir John is so brilliant. He says something along the lines of, I'm going to go and think about, or I'm going to try to discover the answer already in my heart. And while I do it, I'll be thinking about the church. I don't think he loves the church.
He's also someone who represents the middle way, but he's a man of just incredible wealth and opulence.
Yes.
And he
misery.
luxuriates in everything, especially
Yes.
his depression.
Yes.
And this is a person that we can relate to, but at the same time not. He doesn't
Right.
have to see his parents because they have separate wings in their own house.
Right.
So he's the closest thing to some sort of middle way for the church, but I don't
That's
know.
the other
Yeah,
thing.
I was so torn in that scene because
yeah.
on the one hand, I look at Brannigs and I say, okay, this is a man who's going to try and teach a lesson to these people potentially. He's clearly a deep philosophical thinker, and so when he goes on to a parable, I presume that he's trying to make an overt point to these people. However, I didn't consider the possibility that he is trying to make that point by sort of obfuscating the truth within his comment, like, or sort of like presenting a false picture of what he's trying to say so that they will correctly identify that's false and call him out on it or feel that dissonance. And so I think like in that scene, that's what I was feeling. Like something is not right here because I don't think that's love. I don't think like sitting by and sending your thoughts and prayers is love in any way. So like what he's saying, I think should be teaching them a lesson about love. But when he says it and I go, that's not love, I try and like sort of flip on my head. What could he be talking about here that would make that make sense? And it might be a thing where it purposely doesn't make sense. And that's the point. It's supposed to stir within you some feelings of like, it just upset you. It's supposed to make you feel bad about what he just said, right?
Yeah. And also, I think there's something also that Christ did in his parables is like there's a seemingly correct answer that the parable baits, but it's also like if you
Yes.
it's like a lot of times Jesus would get these Pharisees tied in the knots because he would lay something out that's like if you say the right answer, it'll betray how unloving and foolish
Right.
your teachings are.
Or to them, that's the
know?
correct answer. To
Yeah.
Jesus, the correct answer is very different.
Right. And I felt like, but the other things is clearly Sir John Brannigs is playing games with them. Like there's some gamesmanship involved with them showing up late at night, having to leave the next morning and being like, well, I'm sorry, I go to bed at 10:30.
Yeah.
When we see him later on the night, he's up late playing harp and, being denied. What is everyone on the same page that this silver box is like a heroin kid?
It's gotta be
thought so,
heroin.
yeah.
Yeah, it's some kind of good night medicine that he indulges in.
For sure.
So like, I don't know. And the other thing that I don't understand, and maybe this is a desperation, but like, why does Voiello and the rest of the cardinals think that this guy is the surefire solution to Pope? Because this guy, like,
especially after seeing him, like
yeah,
going
like
there
as they're knocking on his door, if there's like a black cloud in the shape of a skull with like thunder claps of lightning, like this seems like they're doomed. Like he's saying that he thinks the Pope Pius the 13th was a great pope, and he's talking about the things that Francis II did. Like, why, just because he preaches the middle way, why do they think that this guy isn't going to do everything else this guy already wields power effortlessly in conversations, in his estate, everywhere except, I guess, his relationship with his parents. In the church, obviously, he's converted a bunch of Angelicans. Is that how you say
Anglicans,
that?
yeah.
Anglicans. I don't know why they think that, other than he's the only pope that they can build consensus around.
And there's
That's a
also
big part.
this other faction of people, the Sophia's husband, Thomas, that we're introduced to for the first time, and the Italian minister of finance, that also think that they can control Brannix once he gets to be the Pope.
With his terrible secrets?
And it's
There's
like,
that scene in that beautiful
Drinking bunker.
drinking bunker. What's the term for cellar?
Yeah.
Like that cellar is
Cruciform
fucking
cellar.
amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that they'll be able to control Brannix. I mean, as the Pope has so much power.
They imply that Brannix is gay or perhaps bisexual.
just based on
Do
like
they?
a Sente's reverence of him. He wrote Sente a 36-page letter,
Well,
which
the
could just
way-
be the way he talks to everybody, which I would believe.
And
but
the way he says, we spent many a fruitful night in quiet prayer and
Yes,
contemplation,
okay.
and then we find. I didn't get last year that Guterres was also gay.
I don't
I thought
I
he
think
was
you were
out-
supposed to know before right now when he
Yeah.
knocks on his door.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm that's something he very much struggles with. I think even more than just like a religious aspect, because apparently Gutierrez was raped by an atheist
Right.
when he was young.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's got a lot of mixed feelings within him, right?
Sure.
Like if he is actually gay, then man, the psychological baggage that event must just constantly weigh on him.
That's
Yeah.
the other thing I thought, like, I got a little bit like I'm looking over, like, wow, there is so many complicated things you can say about these relationships with the, they kind of show Guterres as being a virtuous person for turning down the other priest. But I don't know that I don't agree with the Catholic teaching of, a priest having to be chaste.
But he does.
But
And I think that's
I
important,
understand.
right? Like,
yeah, he does, and he's not being cruel about it. But it's like one of those things where I watch and I see these men being miserable for what I can see as no
Right.
good reason, but they see this as a act of a devotion and as a dedication of their entire life, not just a small part of it, but their entire aspect of being towards this service. But when I see that, and then I see how hypocritical they are, it's like, man, you're really That's not. I keep coming back to Jesus' words, like that's the whole idea of like straining the gnat to gulp down the camel. It's like, I'm not gonna have gay sex, but I will sit in this lap of opulent luxury while Europe burns because we can't figure out what to do with these people that need our.
And they eject the immigrants or the refugees, don't they?
Almost immediately.
Do
Yeah.
they eject
This
them? I
episode.
wasn't clear
because
if they
I
did.
think that's what's happening when the kid sneaks off.
And he's
Yeah.
All of them are
sleeping in
being
the-
sent out. He's sneaking off onto the grounds of the Vatican.
Yeah, because I think he's in love with one of the nuns.
I don't know he's in love, but I think he just doesn't want to go back to his situation.
Yeah, I
It
feel like
was.
they're just showing like
He's
microcosm stories. Like the nun, that one
Yeah.
particular nun and the refugee had a moment where they met eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But the nun is also battling her own struggle of her mother
Yeah,
dying.
right. I think
And the
that's the same
refugee,
one, yeah.
I think, was praying in a garden.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll continue to get the idea of what these groups of people are doing by showing how they're living in the Vatican together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long he's going to stay there, but seems like a placeholder for all of these people.
Yeah.
I loved how completely. This is another thing why I don't understand why Voiello thinks that this is the way to go. Is just how even not being the Pope as equals, Brannix just. Voiello has no idea what to do with this guy. Like, he's like, oh, we should do conversation. It's the only way to get to know people. Oh, there's always love at first sight. And amorous passion, silent and savage, well, that would make me feel uncomfortable. Like,
Which I think is a pretty good joke given the situation.
Yeah, and then he bookends it at the end when he walks away and says, "When are we going to see each other again?" He says, "Oh, that's something a lover would say."
A lover's question, Voiello.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got this guy. He has no idea. He's trying like every single like. I feel like Voiello steals himself for every conversation. It's like, okay, this is the one where I'm going to get him on and pin him down, and Sir John always just spins him around, and he's somehow points the wrong direction. You know?
Yeah, it's weird to me because he's overtly, like at that dinner scene, Branix is overtly saying we're potentially going to have a new Secretary of State when I'm Pope, if you make me Pope.
Yeah.
And he's looking around the room and he's looking at Gutierrez, who would probably make, a decent Secretary of State.
Uh-huh.
And he seems to be saying a lot of the right things, right? That Branix likes to hear.
He's speaking what is in his heart.
Yes, and a certain truth from a certain perspective. And one that Branix also comes from, I think. Voiello should be very concerned about this guy, and he seems to be ignoring all the signs. I'm with you. I don't understand why this guy is still the pick when Voiello goes there. He's steamrolled. He's told in pretty certain terms that he's not going to be the Secretary of State once he's Pope.
Yeah, or there's a
I don't
threat
know why
there.
Voiello is. There's a big threat. Yeah.
Well,
Does he think that's the only pick that they can get through? Because it's either him, Hernandez.
I mean, yes.
Or
So Hernandez
Branix.
and him-
Branix wasn't even there, and he still got the majority of the vote. So it's like throw in behind Branix and do your best.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing is like I think there's something interesting there that between Hernandez and Voiello, they could have a pope that they both would probably agree to, but they'd have to agree to share power and get behind each other, and that's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's the crazy option. Let's put that off the shelf.
Yeah,
and
they're
now
two
let's go-
different. They're two different.
But
I guess that's another question. Why would Hernandez go along with this? Because he's not gaining anything from this, is he?
Yeah, but he knows
Does he
that
think he can manipulate the new
He can't beat
Pope?
Viello's ironclad control of the Vatican faction of cardinals. I think so. It's like they're in a stalemate, and they could either agree to share power, which obviously is out of the question, or they could go. But when I think about like how Voiello, and even I'll throw in someone I think is very perceptive, like Sophia, they're both trying to sell this potential new pope on like, oh, go to Rome, it's so much more joyful and it's a smaller state and you get away from these parents,
The weather's great.
But Gutierrez like leans into like, well, the uncomfortable truth is that the new pope is being a pope is being a martyr.
Yeah.
And after Pope Lenny, it's also a burden, and then after Francis II, it's scandalous and suspect. And that is what appeals. That's the part of the job that appeals to this guy who likes to luxuriate in depression the way Francis wanted to have a luxuriating soak in poverty.
Yeah.
And the Voiello dismissing Gutierrez's very accurate psychological ploy here, I thought is just telling. It's weird how, and he made the same mistake with the previous pope, nominating this well-liked American kind of dilettante that they thought would be so easy to control. Like, it's kind of amazing they're making the same mistake twice. But I think that too is something they're trying to say.
It really makes me question how Voiello got the job in the first place, given that he seems so oblivious and seems so incapable of persuading anyone of anything. Every person we've seen him interact with has steamrolled him. Mm-hmm. From the Pope to the marketing professional to cardinals on his level to cardinals below him, like people without his station in the Vatican. Like, he's just getting run over at every opportunity, and he never seems to have a very good comeback.
It seems, though, that this is like we never saw Voiello at his heights, right? We saw all of his schemes fail against Lenny because Lenny is like a pope unlike anything else. I think they're trying to say is that there was like this papal machinery that everyone kind of decided to go along with, and it broke down with Lenny. He's the first one that said nope, and then they go with the Pope Francis II, who was going to be back in that mold of a weak, easy to control pope, and then accidentally, because of the Holy Spirit came and took his notes, he got his ideas of how he can flex power, and they're now stuck in the cycle to where like I thought it was interesting what Brannick said about like you want me to the church is naked and bereft and you want me to clothe her with my middle way, but before we clothe her we have to examine her body for disease and figure out what's and those other popes like no that's not what we want to do. We just want to clothe everything.
That's what Francis did. We don't want that.
We need a moderate here to just wallpaper over this stuff. But it is weird how nobody, like, as much as I like Sophia, and I kind of want to talk about that here in a bit, her and her husband are pretty wrong-headed too. I don't know what big secret they think they have over this pope, like, or I guess the potential new pope. It seems that some suspect details around the death of his brother.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, this is a suggestion from Hernandez, right? This new pope, John Malkovich. So you have to wonder, given that this doesn't change much of his station within the Vatican, why would he go and suggest a power split here with a person who's already more powerful than him? He either doesn't care about the power, which I don't think is true because he's running for the Pope here.
Yeah.
Or he has some other, secret agenda behind the scenes. He has a plan B, right? And Voiello is following hook, line, and sinker for it.
I want to talk about,
and this could be part of that,
while we're still talking about Sir John, his backstory, because if you pay attention, you find that like he had a very well-loved brother that died around the age of 25. If you look at like the shrine that his parents have built, there's like a priest's frock. There's tennis trophies. There's a bunch of photos with Sir John cut out of them. That implies that both of these brothers were priests, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know why. It's also funny that Adam is the favorite when they're identical twin. They're the twin brothers, and they both seem like they're doing it. I would love to know more about like this kind of Gattaca situation, and then, except for they're twins. You know?
And Sophia goes into his private room at some point and sees pictures of John at around that same age, being kind of like a punk.
See, I thought he was like in high school age in those photos.
He might have been.
I don't think so, because he was alone in all of the pictures. So maybe there was a reaction to his brother's death,
that happens post seminary school though, because like 25, you're probably.
I mean, death changes you.
No, I get it, but then how do you have time to swerve back and to become a cardinal of his stature?
Okay. Yeah, clear this up for me. That was supposed to be John Brannick's?
I think so. Okay. Unless it's Adam, and we don't, like, that's...
I mean,
I was very confused by, like, which one was which in any given scene.
Yeah, I think
because they don't look anything like John Malkovich.
Right.
And they're twins, so, like, how much would they look like each other? I don't know.
Yeah, because they don't say they're identical twins, but or do they? No, they
no,
don't.
They don't, but they could be.
Yeah, or they could be intended to. Yeah, I think some of that's intentional. Like, when I remember... because Sir John says, I love my brother as much as anyone. And then later there's a scene of like them on horseback considering their manner. And like, they're the one brother's laying on the other on horseback in a very familiar, intimate way. And I'm like, yeah, because it wouldn't surprise me if that actually was Adam.
Yeah. I mean, that line where he says, I don't want there to be any question. I definitely love my brother.
Yeah.
Makes me think that he had some very serious part to do with him dying.
But he also
that he carries
that
a lot of guilt around about too.
My parents blame me for not trying harder to save my brother some fateful winter morning in 1985, and implying like the theme of blame there makes it seem like he's wrongfully blamed.
Yeah, maybe they dipped out of seminary school, got into the punk scene, started doing heroin, and one of them overdosed.
Oh, shit.
Well, I was wondering that is like maybe if his brother was the rebellious one, but maybe his son somehow, since he was the golden child, it was all blamed on Sir John, and that's Sir John's private shrine to his brother, like the real brother.
That shed a totally different light on his sleeping habits, let's say.
Yeah.
If that were the case.
Yeah.
Also, did a centipede literally crawl into his father's ear, or was this some kind of...
I don't know.
Can we talk about the spiritual aspects of this show? Like Lenny, despite being in a coma, is an active participant in this season.
Yeah, he seems to be the angel on their shoulder.
They're all thinking about him.
It's not. It's everyone that's thinking about him. Like Voiello, obviously, but like in a weird, like Lenny's helping him start a fire.
Yep.
He's helping Gutierrez maintain strong with his version of the faith. He's
Takes the box away from Branix.
takes the box away from Branix. But I also I don't know if that's literally true, because the way it would not surprise me that there's a famous Renaissance painting of the Apostle Paul being struck blind
reaching
on the
for
road.
a syringe.
But being struck blind on the road to Damascus heroin by Christ, because the way he had to kind of I wonder if he did that himself, but he was I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the box was just out of his reach, and in his mind he was thinking of Lenny, and he was thinking of the decision of becoming the Pope, and I think he was rejecting it in that moment.
And what was he doing with Sophia, rolling her over onto her back after he just got done talking to Gutierrez about, pleasure just leads to pain later.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk. I think one of the things they're going to try to establish is Lenny as a saint. I think that Lenny is eventually going to die. There's a couple of requirements to becoming a saint. You have to have a certified miracle that you've accomplished, which you already did last season.
Yeah.
And I think you have to have 3 post-death appearances.
Okay.
Which seems to already have happened. Now he just has to die and he can become a saint.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is happening. I think that Sir John, maybe he reached for it and he bumped it away, or maybe the butler, they show the butler taking the box away the next night. So it could be that the butler did it and he's just not admitting it.
The butler always did it.
You're right.
I mean, they had a conversation about it on the grass. He says, why didn't you bring me my box? He said he did. And then he says, I couldn't find it, but I slept anyway. And he says maybe that was a sign. So I think he's helping him with this decision to not need it anymore.
That's an interpretation of what we saw. But like I said, if you there's a lots of rooms for things to be, because are there real miracles in the show? I guess this is the leftovers type question.
I mean, the Esther thing is about as close as I've seen to something that I would describe as a miracle in the show.
But what's going on with Esther? Because it seems like her husband has left her.
Yeah, she's a little down in the
bereft.
dumps.
She's taking menial jobs, cleaning churches. She's
selling the
her
same story over and over
for increasingly less or decreasingly less amounts.
It makes you wonder if she's going to start selling them different stories of Lenny for money,
or if Lenny makes an appearance to her and she's going to
she has a lot of experiences with Lenny that weren't that one miracle.
That's true. The time I tried to seduce the Pope.
There's that one time he wore a papal running suit right by my house and stared in the window while I had sex with my husband.
That was weird. That was very weird.
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
I would pay money for that story.
But that would be if she cashes in on that relationship, it would be in violation of what Lenny told her to do, which is to let some of this stuff be mystery. And so I think that's an interesting question. Is Lenny supernatural? Are these things happening? I want to talk about Sophia's sexuality because I saw a lot of bad takes, I think, on the internet about, I think this is a totally fundamentally different Sophia this season because she's on her knees getting jerked off on and she's rubbing cell phones on her vagina and
she's teasing the monks in the garden.
And I'm like, what is it? I mean, if you think that's fine, and I'm not picking a fight with you. I'm just going to interject another alternate hypothesis, which is a strong, confident, powerful, successful woman could, behind closed doors with her lawfully married husband, get freaky in a bunch of different ways sexually, and that's okay, and it doesn't destroy her character. It doesn't make her weaker. It doesn't make her...
What was her character before? Because I always viewed her as a sort of corruptive outside influence, though one that maybe was less potent than the corruptive inside influences. I don't mean corruptive in a negative, evil, bad way. What I mean is just subversive. Different than the church.
Definite sexual energy between her and Lenny, but Lenny is a pure being that could not be corrupted by any kind of human vice, apparently. So
she's the marketing director, so she's in charge of putting your face on plates and lighters and things like that, and she's a manifestation of lust and greed in that kind of way. But
absolutely,
I mean,
what I'm saying is we didn't know anything about her private life last season, so how could anything the only way that would change your opinion to know what she does behind closed doors with her husband is if you think that inherently makes a person bad or wrong or weak. The fact that
just because you've seen what she does behind closed doors.
Yeah, and it doesn't even seem like there's definitely, it seems like her husband and her likes to play with sexual power dynamics, but not in it's You know, the difference between creepy and like really fucking sexy is consent, and they're both like, and it seems like that maybe she's turning the power dynamic on him with the phone sex stuff. Like I thought it was,
And
I
that's
was
what that
shocked.
scene with seducing the monks is about.
Yeah,
right? She's
her
fucking
using
with
her
them.
power.
Yeah,
Or like
exactly.
Even that scene where he jerks off on her, she changes her suit and she comes back. She says, "Your only mission in life is giving me pleasure."
yeah.
So for you to think that she's not willing or consenting in any of that is a bad take.
And not only that, but like to think that like that she would do that makes her a weaker, less powerful, less like destroys her character from last season is extraordinarily bad take. The only thing I saw was like there's some people concerned with the actor herself, like. You know, there's a lot being made about like, you know, people being forced into nude scenes and nude contracts and like sexual things that they're not comfortable with on screen. If there's any evidence of that like Paulo Sorrento is like, hey, we're going to need you to take your top off and rub yourself on your pussy. And she's like, I'm not comfortable with that. It's like, fuck you. It's art. You're going to have to get comfortable. That's gross. And I wouldn't support it.
But
there's
I don't
zero
know anything
evidence.
about that,
People like are having that take and there's zero evidence.
For all we know, she went to Paulo and said, put me in this scene. Like, can I write this scene?
Or she saw the script and like, fuck yes, I want to do that. That seems like
we know literally nothing about it as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. But
although I will say
that,
in that scene, I like maybe she gets off on this, but I've seen enough Scooby-Doo to know that when there are that many paintings in a room,
Someone's got eyes behind it.
someone is watching.
well, I mean, it was definitely filmed as like an exciting voyeuristic.
Right,
absolutely.
She's
Yeah,
excited
she
by
wanted
all the
these-
noblemen
Yeah,
watching
all
her.
these saints
These
and
saints and-
luminary
yeah.
figures with their kind of, and the way they pick out the expressions, it's like they're all kind of like, oh,
right. It's the same thing they
great.
did with the chapel last
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
So yeah, I thought that was a bad take on Sophia, and if you know, there's a lot of people like, oh, it's
I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with those scenes,
especially juxtaposing them with the profane, the quote unquote profane and vulgar with the holy
Yes.
and spiritual.
Yeah, it's not without reason. There's been plenty of horror stories of, you know, questionable consent and things, but this is, I think this is what it looks like when it's done right and artfully and tastefully.
Yeah. What else do we want to talk about?
I did a little bit of research on Cardinal Newman.
Okay, yeah. The middle way.
Yeah, so this middle way. So Cardinal Newman is a real cardinal. If you didn't catch it in the episode, this is the philosophical influence for Branagh.
Not as literal mentor, because this guy died in like the late 19th
late
century.
1800s.
Yeah.
So yeah, he just much like, you know, Francis II was very into the teachings of Francis I, and it's the same thing here. And Cardinal Newman, apparently, this middle way is, as best I could tell from like 15 minutes of Wikipedia reading, is essentially a middle way between religious knowledge and sort of physical knowledge. I wouldn't quite call it secular knowledge because I don't think they would use those terms. But Newman is a guy who tried to establish in the middle 1800s a sort of school in Oxford that would teach the middle way. And he met a lot of resistance from the church because that was very much not something they were super interested in. They wanted it to be religious teachings primarily.
Yeah, not to cede any power to the physical.
Right, and he wanted to kind of blend the two because he saw the value in both, right? And so it's interesting because he was actually an Anglican convert to Catholicism, and there's much ado about that in this episode, how Branagh has converted so many Anglicans, right? I don't know what exactly they're getting at with that other than this middle way being some blend of, you know, how you could see Francis and how you could maybe see, you know, the changing times, right? The thing that's consternating the church at the
between
moment.
the corrupt, scandal-plagued church before and the weirdly, you know, Christ-like manifestations that Lenny and Francis II were showing. Like it's like Voiello's trying to he's trying to just steer it back towards the middle, something he sees as sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think it's also telling that the priests are talking about like, you know, Branagh is the one who can bridge our past and our present, and then Guterres is, but what of our future? No, it wasn't Guterres. It was the fat cardinal.
Yeah, I don't know his name.
Yeah,
God,
I
he's
can see
very
in my head it's
fat.
Aguirre.
there you go. Yeah.
I
something
don't
like
mean to
that. And he's
disparage
like,
him,
what of the
but,
future? And he's like, oh, the church doesn't concern itself with the future. Like,
Yeah. You should be. That should be the one thing you are concerned with. Maybe ditch
But-
the past and go with the future because that's what you need.
But that's the thing is, like, I think that's actually probably, I mean, Jesus was always saying, don't worry about the future. God's got you, you know? Like, don't,
Yeah,
like,
you're
God
not
knows
wrong.
that there's a time of day where all this is going to be swept away anyway. Don't worry about it. You know, just learn from your past and live in the present. Like, I think that's kind of official church stuff. It does seem to these atheist ears foolish as fuck, but
I constantly look at this show and I go, how much do these people believe the things they're saying?
man,
Do they believe the doctrine? Do they believe it? Because, like,
yeah.
in some ways they live it. In other ways, they definitely don't.
Like, I think Voiello was, like, genuine when he talks about, like, Sophia's like, oh, think of how many lighters I could sell with this, the Pope flipping off people in a mohawk, and he's like, I'm thinking about how many souls we'll deal in. Like, I do think he sees his roles like, I have to be the thing.
But does he mean souls or does he mean pocketbooks? Like,
That's a great question.
I don't fucking know with these guys.
Yeah.
One and the same.
We saw from last season, Voiello's also capable of being moved and inspired. Like, it's not completely dead.
Did you think there was a bit of foreshadowing? There was a scene of Voiello and Brannick meeting for the first time. And Voiello is standing there framed with a chandelier right behind him with his hands behind his back as if he's a hanging man is what it looks like.
Yeah,
Do you think there's a bit of like
way...
foreshadowing and Brannick takes over, Voiello's out?
It could
or could
totally
he literally die?
Yeah.
Yeah, because like Jim was saying, he also kind of made a table threat about, oh, it sounds like you're a future Church of State to the younger gay cardinal.
And I wouldn't put it
Oh,
past
I thought he
this show
said that
do
to
visual.
make fun of him.
Well, but to say that out loud in front of the existing Secretary of State that, like, hey, there's a guy younger and hungrier than you.
I thought he was saying, Ascente said, you sound like a future pope already. And he said, you sound like a cardinal of state. I thought he was saying, implying that he was just kissing ass.
Well,
like
but
Voiello does.
It works both ways. I think it works both ways. Like saying you blame God for everything and giving God credit for everything. It's like they kind of seem. You can't say a guy's kissing ass to try to do something without also introducing the idea to Voiello that, like, hey, this is also a threat.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of symbology. I thought that there's like the door to the shrine that his parents had built to Adam. They always framed it as like these big cross structures with the no admittance.
Right.
And then like those cross structures, those paneling on the doors had like very visible nails, like in the spot where if it was a cross, Jesus' hands would be. And I think, you know, there's also that reminded me a lot of Jesus saying that like it's easier for a camel to squeeze through an eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. Like, you know, this is not the way to get into heaven. This relentless idolatry of another person, this wallowing in grief, because like, you know, among many other things, that seems like if you're so committed to your grief that you've had this 40-year ritual of like flogging yourself about it, like how much hope for an eternal reward in heaven with your dead son do you actually have to be that absorbed to where it just consumes the rest of your life? Also, the only reason they can have this elaborate rituals is because they're so fucking fantastically wealthy. Like a person that had to work a 9 to 5 can't afford to luxuriate and this depression and sadness the way they have.
Right, and it's really pitiful to see these young nurses just sitting there also wasting their own life away.
Yeah.
Identically dressed and like, and just staring off in the middle distance.
Yeah.
Right. They're not doing it for pleasure like the butler is.
No, it's a hell of a way to make money.
Right.
Yeah. And just like, man, I just think of like how powerful and wealthy, like like Sir John might be among other things, like sixth in line to the throne of England with how big their estate is and how much money they have to maintain it.
2,500 acre estate.
Yeah, you forget
gardens.
that this is set in modern day because of all of this finery and circumstance and pomp, you know.
Like Lord Grantham in
until he
Downton
mentions
Abbey.
Brexit at dinner, and I'm like, oh shit, right.
Yeah,
right.
Like I just kept
that
thinking,
was jarring.
I just kept thinking like Lord Grantham, if he showed up at this estate in like 1920, would be like, my God, man, how do you afford to keep all these servants and stuff? Like, let alone in 2020.
Right.
Oh, that's the other. What did he mean by Brexit as? What do you say about Brexit?
It was unchristian.
He said it was another small step towards the dechristianation of Europe. How?
So you view that as?
I assume because the church would lose some kind of influence over that portion of what used to be the EU.
Well, it's like Oh, I guess like if you're thinking that only Catholics are Christian.
Well, no,
then...
I'm just thinking I assume it's easier to govern from a place of religion with a united set of peoples than it is to do so with a divided set.
Right. To say you're a Catholic country and lose a lot of your country, then you don't have the control over their, upbringing, their religious.
England is not any stretch of imagination a Catholic country.
No. Well,
they're a minority in that country.
Right. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how much power like the Vatican has over, the EU in general.
Right.
But I assume that this is making it more difficult. Like the separating of people is making it harder.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll be back next week with another episode of New Pope. Until then, I'm A.Ron.
I'm Jim.
I'm Cecily.
See ya.